Hi. This presentation is about integrating systems thinking with spiritual meaning. And I'd like to kick off with a quote from Fritjof Capra's recent book, The Hidden Connections. Spirituality, then, is always embodied. The central awareness in these spiritual moments is a profound sense of oneness with all, a sense of belonging to the universe as a whole. This sense of oneness with the natural world is fully borne out by the new scientific conception of life. We belong to the universe. We are at home in it, and this experience of belonging can make our lives profoundly meaningful. So this presentation is going to explore some implications of Fritjof's insight about the spiritual dimension of systems thinking, while noting its significance for achieving true long-term sustainability. It will identify some disconnects between systems thinking and some fundamental assumptions in our global culture, and it will go on to propose an integrative framework for inquiry into science and meaning. I probably don't need to convince anyone here today that our global society is on an unsustainable trajectory. Here, for example, is a graph showing the exponential rise of our global energy consumption over history. This exponential trajectory is ultimately driven by our core societal values. Right now, the ubiquitous belief in perpetual material progress is a powerful engine of this growth. But if we go back in time, we see that this arose from a view of nature as a resource to be exploited, which in turn grew out of the European view of man's God-given role to dominate nature, which in itself was a product of monotheism. But we can trace even monotheism to the ultimate source of the dualism of the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks were the first to completely separate the human soul from the body. And they connected the soul to the transcendent meaning of the universe, while the body became just another part of the material world. This split between transcendence and the material world is known nowadays as substance dualism. Amazingly, this substance dualism maintains its hold on our thoughts to this very day. Here is a famous quote from the great evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould. "The magisterium of science covers the empirical realm, what the universe is made of, fact. And why does it work in this way? Theory. The magisterium of religion extends over questions of ultimate meaning and moral value. These two magisteria do not overlap." And the very same year, the prestigious National Academy of Science joined him in saying that science and religion occupy two separate realms of human experience. Demanding that they be combined detracts from the glory of each. Now, in both cases, these were most likely defensive statements designed to protect science against the encroachment of fundamentalist Christianity. But the point is that this separation between science and ultimate meaning is rarely, if ever, questioned. However, I'm proposing in this presentation that as long as our global values arise from that dualistic foundation, we will never achieve a truly sustainable global society. Instead, if our understanding and experience of the material world were what generated our values, then they could lead us to perceive and act on the material world in a more sustainable and harmonious way. And dynamical systems theory offers the possibility of this kind of integrated worldview. Over the past few decades, many leading thinkers in systems theory have pointed towards a new intrinsic source of meaning. They have started out from a wide variety of different disciplines. As we see here, biology, physics, complexity, science, ecology and sustainability, phenomenology, Buddhism, and neuroscience. And yet their work has all been pointing in the same direction. But in spite of all their brilliant insights, a comprehensive worldview based on systems thinking is still waiting to be developed. I believe that a fundamental reason for this is that the context of the worldview in which these new insights occur. Our received cultural assumptions are incompatible with systems-based meaning. Our language and structures of thought are based on mind-body dualism, a view of an eternal God as creator of the universe and the external source of value, a belief in the value of transcending our material existence, and in the absolute right of humans to dominate the natural world. There is, however, another highly developed worldview that goes back as far as our current Western cosmology, and which offers a compatible foundation for systems-based thinking, the traditional Chinese worldview. Instead of mind-body dualism, the Chinese conceive of an integrated heart-mind called Xin. The Tao is seen as giving birth to the natural world and the source of its value as intrinsic. The ultimate purpose of life is not transcendence but harmony, and the role of humans in the natural world is seen as cultivating that harmony. For the first 1,000 years of the modern era, Chinese thought was driven by three separate traditions: Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, all three of which were synthesized during the Song dynasty that flourished around 1000 AD. Philosophers combined the sense of the dynamic Tao intrinsic to the universe, the Buddhist idea of the dependent co-arising of reality, and the Confucian idea of the self embedded in society to create what they have called the school of the Tao, and which we in the West have come to know as Neo-Confucianism. These Song philosophers saw the entire universe as comprised of qi, which we can think of in modern terms as energy/matter, and li, the principles according to which all the qi is organized. Now, some years ago, as I was reading books on dynamical systems theory, I began to realize that what modern complexity theorists are actually describing is the li. Here's an example. A quote from Scott Kelso's book, Dynamic Patterns, the Self-Organization of Brain and Behavior. I have called the overall approach dynamic patterns. The term is intended to capture what is, in effect, the functional organization of living things. Dynamic patterns are somewhat independent of the stuff that realizes them. Now here's a description of the li from Joseph Needham, who wrote the 20th century classic of Chinese studies called Science and Civilization in China. Li, then, is rather the order and pattern in nature. It is dynamic pattern, as embodied in all living things and in human relationships and in the highest human values. This confluence of thought has important implications. Leading complexity theorists are seeking a conceptual framework for modern systems theory. Here is a quote from Stuart Kauffman's book, At Home in the Universe, The Search for Laws of Self-Organization and Complexity. What is the weave? No one yet knows, but the tapestry has an overall design that reflects underlying law, principles of self-organization. We enter new territory. We are seeking a new conceptual framework that does not yet exist. Now, I've come to believe that the idea of the Li can offer that conceptual framework. Here's how Cheng Yi, a Neo-Confucian philosopher, talked about the Li. All things can be understood by their Li. As there are things, there must be principles of their being. Everything must have its principle. So what would that framework look like? Using that Neo-Confucian construct of Li and Qi, we can think of the entire universe as comprising fixed, Newtonian, and Einsteinian laws that define Qi, and universally applicable principles of self-organization, or Li, that exist in relation to the Qi. If we dig deeper into the Li, we see that in fact there are inanimate Li that describe non-living, self-organized systems such as whirlpools, tornadoes, or the shape of galaxies, and animate Li that describe living systems. In addition to that, we can assume that there are other self-organized systems in the universe which would meet the system's definition of life, but in entirely different forms of self-organization. Then we can go one level deeper and see that there are many systems on the earth that combine both animate and inanimate Li, such as the morphology of rocks and weather systems. And finally, there are the set of principles of animate Li, such as evolvability, autopoiesis, and purpose. Now, based on a synthesis of traditional Chinese philosophy and modern systems thinking, I'm proposing that an approach could be used to investigate the Li that I would call Liology. Liology would offer an integrative framework to both science and spiritual meaning. Its approach would be both scientific and spiritual, conceptual and animate, cognitive and experiential. In order to explain what I mean by Liology, I'd like to turn our attention for a moment back to dynamical systems thinking and its relation to reductionist science. In our modern world, reductionism is so all-encompassing that it is often conflated with the scientific method. But in fact, they are different. Reductionism can be understood as the set of beliefs on the left, that the object of investigation is nothing but either atoms, neurons, or genes, depending on your field. The universe is seen as fundamentally deterministic and the cosmos as ultimately meaningless. There are a set of universal laws of nature which explain everything, and understanding these laws properly requires ever-increasing specialization. Now, these beliefs have nothing to do with the scientific method itself, which relies on the basic process of observation, hypothesis, prediction, test, and analysis. It's a process which is empirical and systematic, and based on the idea that its findings must be reproducible, and on the sharing of data and methodology. Now, dynamical systems theory fully embraces the scientific method while it rejects the beliefs of reductionism. In place of that, it posits that the properties of a system are greater than the sum of its parts. Instead of universal laws of nature, it looks for organizing principles. It aims to understand both the simultaneous top-down and bottom-up dynamics of a system, recognizing that all systems are nested within a hierarchy of networks within networks, and that phase transitions lead to new, emergent properties. Holding this in your mind for a moment, I'm going to ask you to turn your attention now to that other domain of religion. Probably most people in this room would agree that received religious traditions carry cultural baggage with them. the notion of an eternal God as creator, the emphasis on transcendence, the belief in reincarnation, and in values being created externally. Then there are all those culture-specific values and social identities that arise, as well as culture-specific practices and beliefs in divinities, saints, magic, superstitions, and rituals. At the same time, many of us share the experience that spiritual awareness can arise apart from these received religious traditions. This awareness may include, for example, a sense of that oneness that Fritjof mentioned in the earlier quote, an awareness of the value of internal practices such as meditation, and of energy practices such as Qigong or Tai Chi. It might include a dynamical, interactive sense of what the self is, along with an understanding that multiple valid states of consciousness can exist. Now, if you combine the principles of dynamical systems theory with that sense of spiritual awareness, then new emergent principles can arise, which I call here Liology specific. That understanding is both conceptual and experiential. That values and ethics have a material basis. That science and meaning are commensurable. And that theory leads to active participation. My sense of Liology is that it embraces all of these three sets of principles in one integrative framework. To give you a brief example of what Liology can offer us, I want to spend a moment on the central Neo-Confucian idea of Gei-Wu, or the investigation of things. This investigation goes beyond intellectual analysis to gain a fully embodied understanding. In the words of the philosopher Chu Shi, all Li are to be found summed up in the nature which is contained in our own mind. As a result of that, understanding the Li is to gain an understanding of the nature that lies within ourselves. This leads to the Chinese conception of Tiren, which is to understand something with mind and body, with conceptual and animate consciousness, an idea which is unknown in the English language. This whole approach reflects a deep understanding of the fractal nature of the holarchy, as described in systems theory, whereby all systems, including our own minds, are nested within larger networks. Gei-Wu is one example of the kind of approach that can lead to practical implications for Liology. I believe it could potentially facilitate for each individual the integration of action and beliefs. It could also offer a potential framework for the education curriculum of upcoming generations. And in a global society that will become increasingly destabilized through climate change and resource depletion, it could provide future generations with a coherent cosmology that could speak to their spiritual needs while maintaining scientific integrity. So to summarize, I'm suggesting that Liology offers a framework for sustainable living on the earth. For the explanatory principle of life, it replaces reductionism with self-organization and emergence. Rather than non-overlapping magisteria, it understands the relation between the material and spiritual in terms of integrated dynamics. It allows us to see the self not as a separate, fixed, autonomous entity, but as something connected, fluid, interactive. The source of spiritual values and meaning moves from transcendence to the dynamic connectivity between all living things. The natural world is no longer a resource to utilize, but a source of material and spiritual nourishment. And the human relationship to the natural world goes from one of domination to one of guidance, sustainability, and mutual support. For anyone interested, I'm writing a book on this subject called Liology, Towards an Integration of Science and Meaning. You can explore some of my writings on my website or email me for more information. Thank you.